All right, everybody, welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at something that's really interesting and also pretty complex. So you brought in an expert to help us unpack it all.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to dig into this.
Yeah, so basically, we're talking about President Trump's 25% tariffs on goods from Canada and Mexico, which, like, obviously a lot of people are talking about it, but it's a really big deal for automakers in particular.
Right, because like nowadays, cars and car parts, they're constantly like crisscrossing borders during production, you know?
Exactly. It's not like it used to be where, like, you know, a car was made in one country anymore.
It's global supply chains?
Yeah, exactly. So these tariffs, they're kind of like throwing a wrench in all of that.
For sure, for sure.
So what we're going to be focusing on today is this meeting that happened between the big three automakers.
For GM Stellantis.
Right, exactly, and President Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And, something pretty interesting came out of that meeting.
Yeah, definitely. So basically what happened is Trump announced this like 1-month exemption to the tariffs, but there's a catch.
Okay.
It only applies to automakers who are complying with the USMCA.
The USMCA, right? The United States, Mexico, Canada agreement.
Exactly.
So is this like a big deal, or is this just like a temporary thing?
Well, I mean, it definitely gives the automakers a little bit of breathing room, like a short-term reprieve. But I think the bigger takeaway here is that it might signal that Trump is like willing to negotiate on trade.
Okay, interesting. So let's talk about the USMCA then, because I know like to be tariff-free, 75% of a vehicle's content has to come from North America. But like, what does that actually mean in practice?
Yeah, so it's not just about slapping a Made in America sticker on a car, right?
Right.
It gets way more specific than that. So for example, 40% of a car's content and 45% for trucks has to be made specifically in the US or Canada.
Okay.
And this is for like the core components, like engines, transmissions, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So like if you're building a Ford F-150 in the US, that engine like actually has to be made in the US or Canada.
Yeah, if they want to avoid those tariffs.
So that's a lot for these companies to think about, right? Like where they're getting their parts from.
Oh, yeah. It has huge implications for their supply chains and ultimately like the prices that consumers pay.
Right. So it seems like the automakers are kind of in a tough spot here. Like on the one hand, they want to support U.S. manufacturing, maybe get on Trump's good side. But on the other hand, they have to worry about their bottom line.
Totally. It's a balancing act for sure.
And how are they responding to all of this?
Well, Stellantis, which is the company behind Chrysler and Jeep, they sent this really interesting message to their dealers.
What did they say?
They basically said, like, we are prepared to work with the Trump administration. So, signaling that they're willing to cooperate. But then they added, but we need time to make these changes without negatively impacting the business and our customers.
Wow. So they're basically saying, like, we're on board. Just give us a little bit of time to figure this out.
Exactly.
But that makes sense. But this brings up a really important point to me, which is like, it's not just the big three that are affected by this, right?
Right.
What about all the foreign automakers that have like huge production facilities here in the U.S., like Honda, Toyota?
Absolutely. This exemption applies to them too, as long as they're meeting those USMCA requirements.
But isn't that kind of creating like an uneven playing field? Then like, what about the companies that haven't shifted their production to meet the new rules?
That's a key question, right? Does this exemption create winners and losers, essentially?
Yeah, like are we incentivizing some companies and punishing others?
It's definitely something to consider.
It'll be interesting to see how this all plays out because, I mean, obviously this exemption is only temporary.
Yeah, it's just for a month.
Right. So will that be enough time for these automakers to like adjust their strategies?
And for the government to maybe come up with a more like long-term solution?
It's exactly like, is this the end of the story or is this just the beginning?
Good question.
Yeah, a lot to think about, I think. But anyway, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks so much for listening, and be sure to check back next time for more in-depth discussions.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Thanks.
It was fun.
It was great.